Following quite a few stagnant years in Formula One, we were blessed with a whole range of rivalries on and off the track in 2024. Glorious battles such as Max Verstappen versus everybody, Lando Norris versus himself, and McLaren versus, well, its own expectations. But the 2024 season is over now. It's done and dusted, and the easy option would be to do a review of the season and look at some of the rivalries and things that we saw over the year. But to be honest, I think it's far more interesting to look at what the possibilities could be for rivalries in 2025, with everything ranging from teams' performances, driver ability, and even expectations all bottlenecking next season. 2025 looks like it will be a vintage F1 year. So what can we expect from 2025? Well, make yourself comfortable, pour yourselves a drink, and let's jump straight in. And while you're at it, click that subscribe button below and stay in touch for more content. So first things first, I'm going to spin you a bit of a curveball that would be so unexpected that it could very well throw the British media into complete disarray. And I'm not talking about Max Verstappen in this, I'm going to save him for later, but what I am going to talk to you about is Lando Norris versus George Russell. A clash of two very different personalities, and also a situation where a fan base could be split straight down the middle. Two British drivers driving cars from two British-based teams, and also because Sky Sports can't do nuance, I would kind of expect them to choose between Russell and Norris as to who's going to be the good guy and the bad guy. And I'm not choosing this because of the intrigue as to how the British media and Sky Sports would react, but it's just how these two might respond to each other if they did clash and have a rivalry together. That's just too fascinating to turn down. These two in F1 have never really faced off long-term over the course of a season, and how they would respond to each other's tactics and psychology would be very interesting to see. After all, with McLaren scoring their first Constructors' title since 1998, they're going to be hot favourites to take both titles in 2025. And also with Norris positioning himself at the forefront of the team, although I think Piastri might have something to say about that, which I'll get into later. But the question will be, have McLaren grown up enough and learned from the indecisiveness and mistakes from 2024, especially regarding strategy? But as we've seen plenty of times with Norris, when he's winning, he's a media darling. There's smiles all around and everything is well underneath his lime green helmet. But when things aren't going according to plan and things aren't going his way, a very different guy emerges that seems to be worlds apart from the smiley chap we mentioned before. One that makes off-the-cuff comments to the press, which he then ultimately has to retract, as we saw ones with Max and Lewis. And one also that I sense has a tendency to go inside himself and shows a lack of maturity sometimes when it comes to facing adversity. Now, in contrast to Norris, George Russell has also fallen foul of a few things. One recently was being accused of being two-faced. A great politician and a nice guy in front of the cameras, but a very different person off it. But Russell, whilst potentially not having as good a machinery as Norris, I wonder could get frustrated as to why, again, he has his hopes for a title shot ruined for another year, despite being promised the world previously by Toto Wolff. Now, as we've seen a few times before, a frustrated and flustered Russell does tend to make mistakes on the track. Now, he has recently, I think, got better, but in 2025, if any of those things happen around Norris, of course, they're going to be his fault and not George's. In his mind anyway. But if McLaren and Mercedes do produce cars fairly equal on a performance level, George's apparent sense of entitlement versus Lando's habit of speaking before he thinks could definitely do some damage here. And how exactly the media will portray this will be very interesting to see, perhaps with some double standards thrown in there as well. Now, next up is a clash of drivers which I think would lead at least one of them to completely rethink their approach. And I'm talking about Max Verstappen versus Oscar Piastri. So following from what we saw in 2024, I'm confident in saying that Max kind of had the edge over Lando Norris in most areas. The mind games and psychology that Max was throwing out there created a massive sense of doubt in Lando's head. And not only that, but also in how he managed his races as well. But I have a feeling if it came down to it and it turned out that Piastri was actually the one spearheading McLaren's title charge, Max's mind games and little tricks wouldn't work on him, or nearly enough as well. Piastri just seems to be so chilled beyond his levels of experience that all that sort of stuff would just bounce off him. And I sense that could frustrate Max because that isn't something that he's really used to. After all, he is one of the F1 greats, an amazingly gifted and excellent driver that he is. He can throw his weight around and everyone does seem to get out of the way of him when he does this. But I sense that Oscar, after quietly observing what Lando was going through in 2024 when he was up against Max, I don't think he would give him the same levels of space and allow him to get that kind of foothold in his head. We also have to consider that in 2025, Max is probably going to have to work harder than ever before if he is to become a 5-time driver world champion, especially as everyone is kind of expecting Red Bull to dip after Adrian Newey is heading out the door. But if Piastri does find himself being that biggest problem and biggest nuisance to Max on the track, then that is going to be a very interesting battle to watch. The two of them just couldn't be any more different, and whilst Max has undoubtedly been outperformed at times by Leclerc, Norris, or Hamilton, none of them have really got inside Max's head before. But the way that we've seen Oscar operate in F1 and just kind of take in the environment around him, this might just frustrate Max in a way that we've never seen before. So this next one is going to be something that all the eyes of the F1 world is going to be on, especially for its potential to go amazingly well or the potential for it to go catastrophically wrong. And that is Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. And what's interesting here is that it doesn't matter if the car is a rocket ship, bang average, or absolutely awful. Leclerc and Hamilton are not going to give each other an inch anywhere. And by now Leclerc is very used to the Ferrari way of doing things, whether that's actually good or bad. But Hamilton has a steep learning curve in front of him when it comes to adopting the Ferrari way. And right now, given the attitudes towards him from the team, sponsors, and especially the Tifosi, Charles Leclerc will see Ferrari as his house, especially now that Sainz is no longer there. And any attempt from Hamilton to come in and try and sway the team more his direction is going to be seen as some sort of attempt of a land grab by Leclerc. But in contrast to this, any attempt by Leclerc to strengthen things on his end and defend his own position could be seen by Hamilton as aggressive and even an attack on him personally, especially given the kind of treatment that he enjoyed for all those years over at Mercedes. Now, to be honest, I do think nowadays, if you put Leclerc and Hamilton side by side in the same car in dry conditions, Leclerc comes out on top every time. Now, you may think differently, but that's just my opinion. But also, Hamilton is going to want to do everything he absolutely can to show everyone that he's not a spent force and that he still has a part to play and he can still get that driver's title with Ferrari. But if he is to do that, he's going to have to pull Ferrari more his direction and become more of a nuisance to Leclerc on track. But from what we've seen from Leclerc's outburst when Sainz has kind of thwarted his plans, that is not going to go down well at all. But the question is, though, despite talking about these two drivers, who are the everyday folks at the Ferrari team going to follow, Hamilton or Leclerc? Lewis could have the best aspirations and intentions in the world, but if Ferrari and just as importantly the Tifosi don't follow, then I think he might have some seriously hard times coming to terms with that. But rather than coming to terms with that in that particular scenario, it might just be a little bit easier for him just to blame it on Leclerc. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this whole thing develops, but I'd say of all the ones I'm putting together on this list, that is going to be the one that is guaranteed to blow up. Now, this next one is slightly different because neither party are going to be competing on track in 2025. But their preparation and movements, though, are going to be endlessly compared. So for this next one, I'm going to go with two new names in the works, which are Audi F1 and Cadillac F1. So the backgrounds here are slightly different because Audi will be taking over the dilapidated house that is Sauber. Meanwhile, Cadillac are starting more or less from scratch, or more accurately, what Andretti have built up so far. Now, to be honest here, I'm not really getting a good feeling about Audi F1, and I'm not going to go digging out every single piece of news that there has been since it was announced, but it feels like that there hasn't been any good news about this team at all recently. But weirdly though, Cadillac, who are more or less just an evolution of what Andretti have done so far, seem to have much more of a positive outlook. Although they are yet to announce any drivers or sponsors, there's something about Cadillac that just seems more exciting and far more positive compared to what Audi are up to. It's like 1 minute Audi seem into it, and then the next minute they're not. And then the other minute, it looks like they're going to sell to Qatar or something. So overall, not really a great vibe around this new identity for Sauber. But for us, the fans, it's going to be fantastic to see how these two new teams prepare and kind of battle each other, I suppose, in the PR department in anticipation for the 2026 season. After all, both will want to have a commanding share of the spotlight in 2026, so it's going to be interesting to see what they both have in store. What sponsors are going to be announced, who can sign the best drivers, who is going to have the best looking car, and interestingly, which team are the F1 fans going to be more excited about. Incidentally, do let me know your thoughts in the comments. And also, it's not unreasonable to think that when Cadillac do arrive in F1, the first team in their crosshairs to beat is going to be Audi. They could certainly be the easiest to outperform if Sauber do continue this downward spiral which Audi are going to inherit. But Audi of course will have loftier ambitions considering that they are inheriting an existing F1 team and will probably want to get back to the sharp end of the midfield as a short-term goal, which might mean as well that Cadillac aren't even on their radar and that could come back to bite them. So that gives us the question, do Audi run the risk of underestimating their competition? A name of course doesn't guarantee success, and there really are few things that are showing us right now that this team will be successful. Now I suppose it won't get really saucy until Cadillac start using their GM engine, but how these teams both get it together for the 2026 season throughout 2025 is going to be really fascinating to see. But the question is now, are you guys looking forward to any particular rivalries in 2025? Have I missed anything out? Do let me know below, and if you like, I can comment about them in a later video. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Paul, this is the Gridgab. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Cheers.